Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode we are recording today. I'm joined by Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, who is a lecturer at Shalem College, Jersusalem, and Vice President of Jersusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He served as Israel's Deputy National Security Advisor between 2006 to 2015. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us. We have seen the surprise attack by Hamas in an unprecedented scale. What's your take on this nature and extent of this surprise attack launched by the Hamas? And how is this different from the previous conflicts or engagement with Gaza we have seen in the recent 2 decades?
Well, it is utterly and totally, but in nature. First of all, there was a major intelligence failure to anticipate this kind of massive coordinated attack using technological means, apparently some of them provided or advised upon by the Iranian allies of Hamas. And while we were worrying about disturbances along the fence and the attempt to find modus vivendi with the Hamas leadership in Gaza, the working assumption was that Yahya Sinwar and his government in Gaza basically understand that they have to answer to the needs of a large population, and therefore that we are going to, with some tensions, we can nevertheless get to a modus vivendi of some sort. This all blew up in our face. As it turns out, the military leadership, particularly a man with whom for 30 years we've had an open account, Mohammed Deif, who minded the murderous campaign against the Israelis in the 90s, and we've tried to get rid of him more than once, and somehow he has survived so far. We're planning a massive attack in high secrecy. Clearly, there will be a serious question posed to the key intelligence organizations, both the Directorate of Military Intelligence and the Internal Security Service, the Shin Bet, who's also in charge of Palestinian human intelligence assets, as to how all this could have happened without us knowing what's coming. There was also a failure to array the monitoring systems in a way that would make them redundant and survivable under such an attack on such a scale. And so they were overrun completely in the first half hour, practically. And therefore, the Gaza division was blinded, overrun, its headquarters overrun by the attackers. And there was a failure to coordinate and understand what was going on, while hundreds of Palestinian attackers, both elite forces of Hamas and people who latched on and went in together with them, poured over the border and carried out unspeakable horrors, Nazi-style massacres. And the third failure, which is also going to require some very serious reconsideration in Israel, was that the ground forces have been thinned over the years. The assumption was that with the Air Force and with precision munitions and with efficient early warning, we can stave off this kind of attack. And as a result, a large area of southern Israel was overrun, and civilians found themselves for long hours subject to unspeakable the horrors. So we have suffered a major tactical and operational setback. Hamas can say with pride that they have won a great tactical success. But there are two strategic aspects and grand strategic aspects that turn this over into what is going to become a catastrophe for Hamas. One is that they have evoked in Israel the memories of our worst human experience of the Jewish people, the Holocaust. And if they act like Nazis, they're going to end up like the Nazis. And people need to remind themselves what was left of Nazi Germany in May 45. And we are not going to stop any shorter of that before Hamas is destroyed and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are destroyed as organizations. And ultimately, you ask yourself, how sane is it for an organization that ultimately has limited capabilities to provoke a country with the powers and capabilities of Israel into unrestrained action? And we are not going to be restrained. And we have now, of course, have the clear backing of much of the international community.
I wanted to ask you, from your experience actually of serving as the Deputy National Advisor to the Prime Minister, and you have dealt with intelligence and you've seen operations as well, overseen military operations. You mentioned it was an intelligence failure, and I want to understand that. I mean, it's not an intelligence failure in terms that we see the preceding 2 weeks or a month or a couple of months. The scale of this operation that Hamas has undertaken, infiltrating by land, air, and sea, at the same time knowing exactly where the peace festival, the rave party was supposed to be, or which specific places to target. Is this a failure for at least a year of planning, and we have not been able to understand the nature of this attack?
Yes, it is a major failure. And I would say that it's rooted in a conceptual framework. And I can say I was also part of that conceptual framework for a long time. I'm no longer in intelligence, and I don't know what indications have been or collected that could have told us otherwise. But for a number of years now, we were, shall I say, hoping, assuming, we were being informed through our actions and interactions that the Hamas leadership in Gaza, after 2014, after the battle, or maybe I should say after the battles of 2021, was deterred from further major conflagrations, and looking to see if they can gain some better economic life, more jobs for Palestinians from Gaza. In Israel, all of this was under negotiation with Sinwar and his people, and that fed the assumption, the conceptual assumption, that we are dealing with people on whom we have some leverage. And and throughout that period, the other wing of Hamas was preparing itself secretly for this massive operation. This is not something that was decided upon overnight or in terms of weeks. This is a plan that was put together for a long time. Now, we've had two clashes, rounds of clashes with Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In 22 and earlier this year, and Hamas did not actually join the fighting. So that I think tended to confirm the assumptions about the Hamas leadership. When you look at it retrospectively, you look at Operation Shield and Arrow. You look earlier at Breaking Dawn, the events of 22 and 23. And you see Hamas sitting out a round of fighting with Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So this probably contributed to the misperception that blew in our face on the 7th of October.
And moving from this, I wanted to ask you, sir, that the policy that we have seen over the last few years, especially of this government as well, that there has not been a very clear policy of dealing with Hamas. It's much more to do, before 21, it was much more to do with retaliation and reaction whenever there is any kind of an attack. And right now we see much more of an economic progress that the prime minister has believed that if, the previous government has also believed that if we keep Hamas busy with administration, if we give them the sufficient economic leverage, they will not attack Israel. But I think this is one of the incidents that has proved that Hamas is not uh, inclined anyways for the development of Gaza, and it wants to actually massacre Jews. That's what we have seen very clearly. So,
Absolutely.
where do you see this going forward? What do you see the prime ministers or the securities agencies would focus on actually looking at how they look at Gaza or Hamas from now on?
Well, the nature of the entire equation has now changed irretrievably. We've lost 1,200 lives. The great majority of the citizens butchered. We cannot go back to the status quo ante in any way. The restoration of deterrence was the key to all the campaigns the IDF fought in 2009, in 2012, in 2014, 2021. Basically, the way the goals were defined, quite frankly, the IDF normally wrote the draft and the government endorsed that draft, was to badly beat Hamas, weaken it, but keep it sufficiently alive to be deterred. Deterrence is a psychological condition. And it's a psychological condition. As such, it requires the head to still be on the shoulders of Hamas so they can actually process what happened to them and be deterred. Deterrence is now no longer the purpose of the conflict. The purpose of this war is the destruction of Hamas as a fighting force, probably also as a form of governance, the elimination of its military capability altogether and of its leadership. Without that, it will be very difficult for Israelis to go back to live in the close vicinity of the border with such an entity in control on the other side. And so this is going to be a war to make a profound change in pre-existing realities. This is also the understanding of the world. If you heard the speech, the very moving speech of President Biden yesterday, and if you've seen the declaration of the 5 powers the day before, there's a clear understanding that this is equivalent either to 9/11, Daesh, or worse, to the Nazi atrocities. And therefore, the consequences of the war that Hamas started must be, if you want, it's comparable to 1941. The Japanese have a massive, brilliant tactical and operational success, and they doomed their country to destruction. And this is what Hamas did on October 7th.
And where do you go from here, sir? Because the Prime Minister in his speech as well mentioned that we're looking at a long-term war, and it will have a favorable result. I wanted to understand from your perspective at what are we looking at the result as? Are we looking at going back to the status quo ante before the disengagement back in 2005, where Israel had control over Gaza? Or are we looking at complete destruction of at least Hamas and let another political entity come over and have the rule in Gaza?
Well, basically, there will be urges to return, perhaps even to rebuild a Jewish life there, I don't think this is where the government will go. It will first destroy Hamas and then go looking for a viable political alternative. And I hope, I don't know, but I hope that there will be people in the Gaza Strip who, or alternatively in Ramallah, who would look at the scale of the catastrophe that Hamas have brought upon their people and will look for a different political way, different ideological framework, because there's this bloodthirsty Palestinian lusting for blood, for Jewish blood, has brought them nothing but grief and will bring them even greater grief.
And sir, in the last decade or so, we haven't seen a full-scale war by any chance. We have seen a rather small, focused, result-oriented, probably retaliation or an attack. So how do you look forward from here? I mean, how's the preparedness of the IDF and how's the moral of the Israelis, especially after the attack, actually to go on a full-scale war at this point of time?
Well, let me point out three things. First of all, the capabilities of the Air Force are unlimited, and with American resupply, there will be no choke points going forward, and the capacity to inflict harm on Hamas and its infrastructure and Page and their infrastructure in Gaza is unlimited. The second point is that the IDF is now on full mobilization. 300,000 called up. And of course, this is much more than is needed to actually get a very large contingent, perhaps even larger than the one dedicated to the southern mission, is on alert and ready to respond to any provocations from the north. And if Hezbollah choose to go into this war, they will have to deal with a major Israeli capability, but a very large-scale Israeli capability, but also with an explicit American threat. You saw President Biden yesterday saying, don't, in a very simple and straightforward fashion. And so back to the Gaza, I'm not going to speculate about the tactical and operational means that the IDF would use. We've suffered grievous losses, but the IDF is still a massive military machine. And in combination with air and support and naval raids and the capability that has already been demonstrated to penetrate and capture Hamas leaders, I believe that there is a path forward in a matter, if you ask me, of weeks, not months, of basically eradicating the military capabilities of Hamas. A reserve call-up on that magnitude, by the way, requires bringing this conflict to an end relatively quickly, not because of external pressures, but because we need to go back to a normal existence. This has always been a consideration for Israel, why we normally engage in relatively swift wars, bringing the war to the enemy and breaking the enemy's will. The exceptions, like Protective Edge in 2014, which lasted for 7 weeks, are the result of the fact that this was fought largely in a smaller scale by the regular standing army. There was no massive reserve call-up, and therefore the economy and the normal life of the country could continue despite some rockets here and there. Under the cover of Iron Dome and with relatively small number of reservists called up, we could sustain this for a long period of time. But this is not necessarily going to be the case now, for a variety of reasons. I believe that we're looking at a matter of days for the next stage until in a matter of weeks before its results are ascertained.
This is what I actually wanted to ask you a little bit on this. I have two last questions to ask you. One that I wanted to ask you is, we have seen Prime Minister Netanyahu's strategy is much more aimed at shrinking the conflict with the Palestinians and bringing a relationship with the other Arab countries. We have seen that happen with the Abraham Accords as well. How did this recent events, particularly the Hamas attack, shift the focus back to the Palestinian issue? And what implication will it have for the strategy?
Well, I don't believe that it will make a permanent status agreement with the leadership in Ramallah more likely anytime soon. They will have their own reservations because they will, of course, raise hell over the destruction in Gaza. We have our own reservations because the same kind of Nazi behavior we saw from Hamas is complemented by Nazi sympathies in language, not in action, that we hear from Abu Mazen, from Mahmoud Abbas, president in Ramallah. And that leaves Israelis with very little appetite for you looking at this man and his generation of leadership as a partner. So I think that we can certainly not talk about conflict management the way we used to, but we are going to have to try and look for a new relationship which is not yet based on a permanent on a breakthrough towards a major Israeli concessions and a permanent status agreement. This is not in the cards in the near future. As for the Saudi relationship, so far, by the way, none of our Abraham Accords relationships have been harmed, or for that matter, the Israeli-Egyptian or Israeli-Jordanian relationship. But of course, there's a lot of anti-Israeli sentiment in all these countries. In Egypt, there was a murder of Israeli tourists. But at the end of the day, all of these countries understand that we are fighting a threat not only to us, but also to them. Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood offshoot. Egypt looks, under its present leadership, looks upon the Muslim Brotherhood as an existential enemy. So do most of the relevant Arab countries. And while the Saudis, of course, will keep their distance from Israel at this stage, I believe they very much want to see a defeat of Iran and Iranian proxies. And if we can manage, despite the catastrophic beginning, to turn the tables, I think in the long run, not in the short run, but in the medium and long run, this will actually contribute to the prospects of Israeli-Saudi normalization.
And so, where do you see this conflict not turning out to be an Israel versus Iran conflict, given the fact that Hezbollah has complete support of Iran and it might enter the conflict theater? We have seen some provocations from the Hezbollah, but not a lot. But there are chances in the coming days that it might enter the conflict. And we have seen the Hamas enjoy not complete, but at least partial resources and support from the Iran group as well.
No question.
So, how do you see this conflict not turning out to be an Israel versus Iran conflict in the coming days?
Well, in a deeper sense, this is the first Israeli-Iranian war in which a proxy, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and an ally, Hamas, of Iran, are being used by the Iranians to draw us into a side conflict and away from our main goal, which is to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. But and we have no choice but to pursue this with Hamas now to the end because of what happened. It is no longer a matter of strategic calculation. But having said so, we do stand a chance, I still even believe, even now, with American backing and even an explicit American threat, to deter Hezbollah from getting in. Because at the end of the day, Iran would like to retain a deterrent presence against Israel. so that we would think twice before going after the nuclear capabilities. And this is the purpose of Hezbollah. This is why they have poured so much money into arming and training and building up the capabilities of Hezbollah. And for Hezbollah to commit suicide, with terrible losses on our side, but even more catastrophic losses on their side, on behalf of Hamas, well, that's it's not impossible. This is why Israel is prepared and deployed in a massive way in the north. It's not impossible that they would be dragged in or make the decision to go in, but it is not inevitable either. So we're in going into a period of uncertainty on this question, and we are grateful to the Americans for taking a very firm and explicit stand, warning Hezbollah against this.
So my last question to you is something which is very critical and also slightly emotional to a lot of Israelis at the moment, that we've seen a lot of hostage taking by Hamas actually. And they just not include IDF soldiers, but also a lot of citizens who are ranged from
Israelis and foreigners.
Foreign as well, sir. Yes. And it ranges from even a Holocaust survivor to a young kid, actually, children actually being taken as hostages. So,
yes.
In the coming days, what do you see? Probably you're no longer the advisor to the Prime Minister, but if you have to advise, how do you look the situation at where? Because it's a very critical juncture, because I'm sure Israel would not like to do a prisoner exchange at this point of time with Hamas. Or Hamas has actually threatened Israel if they carry on the offensive, they will start killing the hostages. So where do you see this going forward?
Well, we will do everything we can, first of all, to deter them from harming any of the hostages, making very clear that severe as the consequences have been so far, they will be even more severe. And the message should go also to the Hamas leadership abroad, that they would not survive and will not be allowed to survive if anything happens to any of the hostages. Moreover, we are generating leverage on Hamas day by day, not only by our actions on the ground, but also through the siege. Within the next few days, we would come to the point in which they will start having to answer to a population in Gaza upon which they've inflicted the catastrophe. And any humanitarian relief from this catastrophe would have to also involve a humanitarian solution to the hostage situation. And this is, I think, the leverage that we're going to have.
So, but when we're fighting the enemy, such as like Hamas, which is not rational in the sense, there was no rationality even behind the attack as well. Like they have mentioned of the situation in Alaska, but nothing has happened in the past few days, and they still went ahead with the attack, knowing the consequences that might come with the attack.
This was purely an excuse. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is not in danger. Israel has respected the rights of Muslims there for the last 57 years, 56 years since the Six-Day War. So this is all purely fiction, invented to justify barbarity. And so, yes, you're right. This is an organization governed by the irrational drive to murder Jews. And ultimately, the only way to deal with this kind of organization, whether it's ISIS or Daesh, let's say, or Al Qaeda, or the Nazi Party in its day, or the Japanese militarists, the ultimate way to deal with these types of political expression, quote unquote, is to eradicate them.
So what I wanted to ask you is, can we even trust Hamas to actually make a rather a rational decision? Because I'm sure they knew the consequences attached to this attack. and they still carried on, forgetting that very well their existence might be even at stake with the kind of attack that they have launched. So, with the hostage taking, can we trust them to act rationally on this?
Well, there is something in the analysis of human rationality called bounded rationality. That's to say, you are pursuing an irrational goal, you are driven by irrational urges, but you can calculate in a small scale what makes you, what serves you, and what puts you in even greater danger than you are already. And that's all that we have that we can count on in trying to save the lives of our people in there.
So, well, that's all the question that I had to ask you. So, thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us.
You're very welcome.